Hello and welcome to the Problem Gambling Podcast. I'm Barry Grant, an addiction counselor with Extern Problem Gambling, and my co-host is Claire Dunnigan, an expert by lived experience and recovery coach, and currently doing a master's in addiction counseling, or it should actually be psychotherapy, because that's a whole other thing. But we'll call it counseling and/or psychotherapy. Again, like we did last week, we're recording this episode live on the podcast on the app, the Stop Gambling app, and we invited some of the app users on. We have one app user on today who might chip in with some thoughts or comments, and this will be going out on all the various podcast platforms. And this is part two of a three-part Christmas special where we thought we'd look at some of the triggers that come up around Christmas. It's a difficult time for anybody in recovery, not just for gambling, alcohol being another big one, and other substances also being a big thing at Christmas time. So it can be a dangerous time, and especially if you're in early stage recovery, it's good to have a think about how you would deal with different situations uh, over the Christmas period. You know. So, what we're going to look at today was a little bit around urge management. Uh, so, let's say the trigger might be having to deal with your family for the one day of the year when you're all stuck in the same room. I know it sounds like I'm being kind of cynical there, but for a lot of people, that is the case. It's not all fun and love and good times for everybody at Christmas. For other people, they might be alone at Christmas. That's a very common thing as well. And that can be a big trigger, and you're calling the walls and you're thinking that you're kind of missing out on things, or feeling like you're missing out on things at Christmas time. Probably not working, more time in your hands than you might have. So a lot of triggers there to have gambling urges. So one of the first things we were going to look at today is urge surfing. Did you have some thoughts on urge surfing, Claire?
I come prepared on this one, Barry, because I do have it in my program, and I was actually just going to read what I have because I think
Yeah.
it's a very good guideline. So there's kind of a do's and don'ts list that I would have. So I'm just want to go through it because I think, simple things, but important to remember. So do acknowledge and accept that you are having an urge. Don't give in to temptation, right? Do become aware of your thoughts and feelings without judging or giving in to them. Do focus on keeping yourself occupied with something else. Do speak with a trusted support person, and do use positive self-talk and affirmations. So basically, your don't list, I mentioned one already, don't give in to temptation. Don't try to justify your gambling to yourself, which a lot of us do. Don't overthink it. Don't allow yourself to be in a position where you have access to gambling, and don't allow yourself access to money to satisfy your urge, which, gamblers are very resourceful people, so we can do that. We can convince ourselves that this bill doesn't have to be paid and I can supplement it, or, that I can borrow this. So it's just a very basic guideline on the do's and don'ts, but when you're in that mode, it's hard to abide by them, basically.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and I suppose one of the things maybe that's important there, all of that advice is really, really good advice. One of the things to remind people of that's important is whether it's gambling or cigarettes or alcohol or any other addictive thing, or chocolate bars, whatever you're having an urge for that you're trying to stay away from. Urges peak and crash. So they're kind of like a wave, which is why they call it urge surfing sometimes. So you'll get a peak of intensity, and then it crashes. And that whole process generally for most people will be around 5 minutes, right? So if you can distract yourself 4 or 5 minutes, if you can, keep your mind busy with other things for 5 minutes, focus your attention on something else for 5 minutes, phone a friend for 5 minutes, play a game for 5 minutes, whatever the thing is, you're probably going to come out the other side of that urge and it will have diminished and it won't be as intense and horrible. But if you just sit there with that urge and allow it to do its thing and don't distract yourself and don't have a chat with somebody and don't find something else to focus your attention on, and it becomes the entire focus of your attention, that's a really horrible place to be in. That 5 minutes can feel like a very, very, very long time. And you can make some pretty bad decisions in that short 5 minutes. Would that be fair to say?
I think that would be very fair to say. Actually worked with a lady who would use the mindset mentor method, which is, if she felt the urge, she would say, "Not now, brain," and then she'd go do something else
Yeah,
straight away, just that like interruption of the
yeah,
pathway. But it worked really, really well. Another thing you could potentially do is use that time to go do your kind of advantages and disadvantages list. So if I do this, what's it actually going to do for me, or what's, the worst that can happen if I do this? And I'm sure the worst list will be a lot longer. So little things, gratitude journals,
mhm,
gratitude things, what am I grateful for in my life? And if I gamble, am I going to fuck that up?
yeah, yeah,
Little things that
yeah,
are going to just reinforce why you don't want to do this, because I would imagine that the majority of people who listen to our podcast are doing it for a reason, and it's that they're in that situation where they just want to stop, or they have stopped and they don't want to relapse. So any of those little tools, I mean, and we will talk about tools, but I think I really like the mindset mentor one that I mentioned. You could also do the whole holistic review of your life, which I do regularly still. Assess and reassess. That's what I would
mm,
say to you. Look at every part of your life right now and go, where else can I focus my attention that actually I really, really need to, rather than doing this self-destructive thing that's not going to help me any part of my life. Yeah, those are my
yeah.
my original thoughts on that one.
Yeah, a lot of good ideas in there. I mean, the not now brain reminds me of a story that I've told to a lot of clients over the years. I might have told it on here before, but it bears repeating. Anyway, I was working with a client years and years ago, and it started out as a counselor. And he suffered from really severe anxiety, and he would kind of lash out. For a lot of men, fear and anxiety and stress manifests as anger because as men we're kind of taught you can have two emotions, happiness and anger, and that's it. And so pick one, right? So if bad things are happening, it tends to manifest as anger, and he would kind of get quite aggressive and punch walls and do all these sort of things. But anyway, talking about in the counseling sessions, talking about ideas like thought stopping and stuff like that. Anyway, one day he came back to me and he was telling me about his week, and he said, "I've been feeling really anxious one day this week, and my head was wrecked, and it was really kind of boiling up in me, and I could really feel it." Which is great because now he had a consciousness of it rather than just letting the thing do its own thing. And he said, "I just said to myself, fuck off, brain." Right? So apologies for the swearing. I should have given a heads up there, but you swore already, so you set the tone there, Claire.
Sorry about
But
that.
I love that idea. It reminds you that hang on, there's a mind there that makes loads of noise, thinks loads of thoughts, something like 60,000 thoughts a day apparently. This is just madness. Like if we're totally tuned in, yeah, like that kind of reminds me of my grandfather when I was a kid, flicking between the TV channels like every 10 seconds, and we'd all be there, just pick a fucking channel. Right? That's what the average mind is like thought, 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 60,000, 60 to 90,000. So somewhere between 60,000 and 90,000 thoughts per day, right? Thought, 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 random thoughts, bullshit thoughts, mostly a lot of negative thoughts, a lot of recurring thoughts. It's really noise. Like it's really mostly just noise, right? But if we tune into the noise, that's like sitting there with my granddad flicking between channels every 10 seconds going, "This is great. This, I really like this. Do more of that." Right. So like when you're able to get that separation between there's a you and you know, and there are thoughts, and they are two separate things. They reckon 80 to 90% of our thoughts are automatic. So it's just the mind doing its own thing, right? It's just the mind doing its own thing. The problem that we have in this part of the world is that we think I am my thoughts and I create all my thoughts, right? So we're really engaged with them rather than going 80 to 90% of that stuff is just noise. Just leave it in the background where it's supposed to be, right? So when we get overwhelmed and we get caught up in the thoughts, if we can take a moment and go, now hang on, whether it's not now brain or fuck off brain, or my wife's favorite one is not now Satan. Just know that now we're reminding ourselves, you know, there's me, I'm a human being. There's also thoughts. They're mostly automatic, mind doing its own thing. And I can take a step back from those. And I don't have to let all these mad random thoughts that we all have, like what the Buddhists talk about as the monkey mind. It's just like a monkey leaping from branch to branch in a tree. We don't have to let all that random stuff drive our behaviors, right? Because that would be crazy and we would end up in some very bad places if we did that. And like many of us, myself included, at times will do that. We'll just let the mind take over rather than go, no, hang on. I know what I want, right? What I want is to recover from this horrible addiction. What I want is to grow as a person. And the mind wants something different sometimes, especially in early stage recovery, right? And that's manifests as urges sometimes and other things. So to be able to take that step back and say, not now, brain, right? Now you're reminding yourself, I know what I want. The mind sometimes wants something different. Sometimes the thing that the mind wants is not going to be good for me. And I'm going to take a step back. And that puts you in control of your decision making process rather than handing it over to this random mess of whatever, tens of thousands of mad thoughts. They're not all mad, but they're very random. Am I making sense here? Am I going too deep off the deep end on that one?
No, like obviously it makes sense. It's just terrifying. I was like, I think I was sweating while you were saying that. But you're right. It's just, a lot of us, we don't know how to differentiate, I think is the problem. And, you get all this chaos in your mind and gamblers, okay, even in the recovery stage, you still have that chaos a little bit in your mind. And I think it's very hard to focus and we want everything right now. Um, like I was thinking, when you see in some movies, you see a person when they're like they're still, but everything is moving around them.
Yeah.
And I think that's, the gambler's brain, you actually think that you're the one moving quicker because you think you're speeding your life up with gambling somehow. But actually everything is kind of moving around you instead, and you're stuck there. And I think with recovery, it's hard to adjust to the same pace as everyone else is going. Um, and I don't know, I worry a little bit that that is what I would call a legacy harm. And it's a legacy harm I still, experience 5.5 years later. I recently, realized that I can say I'm in recovery all I want, but I still have terrible habits from, addiction. And some of that is being hyper focused on one thing. So, like, I am a workaholic and I feel like I always have to get to the next stage, kind of whether it's work or academics or whatever it is. And I was at my laptop as I always am, a few weeks ago, and my kids came in and they were like, "Mom, you're always working. Like you're always on your laptop, you're always working." And this is two separate occasions where both of them came in and said this to me. And I had to take a step and look at myself and go, "Do you know what? I need to reflect here now and have you know, reassess where I'm at and go, I don't have to do everything at once." And I think that's very hard for gamblers to do. I think it's very hard for anyone in addiction to do, is to actually look at themselves, especially when you're in recovery, because you think, I'm in a great place now. But you're moving that habit into something else. You know what I mean? So I had to give up, doing those extra little bits I was doing. And I feel all the better for it. But I think it's very easy to find yourself caught in a cycle of destructive habits, whether they are addiction or anything else. And Christmas is a great time for reflection. And I'm getting into that reflective mode because you have that downtime. over the Christmas period. And I will be using it to go, right, use my wheel, go, where are you falling down and where are you putting too much effort in? And that could be a great place for anyone to start, no matter what stage you're in recovery, because we do know that, like, okay, the addiction itself is a problem, but it's a problem for every area of your life generally. So you need to look at them and go, how can I improve other aspects of my life rather than just being hyper focused on one thing. Now, I might have went off in a total rant there, but I'm
No.
sure I had a point.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you see it a lot with people who end up addicted to something. Like when they get into recovery, quite often they will say themselves or their loved ones will say to them that you kind of switch one addiction for another, and the addiction could be going to the gym or running marathons or some other, healthy things, good things. But this idea of everything in moderation except moderation is a pretty good idea. Some people just love the extremeness of things and love being obsessed or obsessive about things. Some people often say to me, I have an addictive personality. You know, I don't know if people use that term a lot, but there's no diagnosis of addictive personality disorder. And believe me, like there's in the diagnostic statistical manual where they list all the things that you can be diagnosed with, there's there's a diagnosis of a condition that, for people who pull their hair compulsively and loads of different things. So if addictive personality disorder were a thing, they would have named it by now, right? But there is kind of obsessiveness and there is compulsiveness and there is that kind of hyper focus on things, which people with ADHD can suffer from, or can be part of the picture for people with ADHD. Hyper focusing on some things, they could be positive things, work, exercise, whatever it might be, but to the detriment of other important things. And it's trying to get that lifestyle balance where you go, well, look, these are all the things that are important to me. How do I share out my time and my focus and my energy and my attention among all of the things that are important to me? So including my family, including my loved ones, my work, my self-care. How do I balance that whole picture? And you can very simple exercise, pen and paper, draw a circle and just make it into like slices of a cake or slices of pizza, or whatever, and go, okay, this amount of my time and energy has to go to work because I got to pay the bills, but I don't want to become a workaholic because if I do that, then there's less of the pie left for my family, for my kids, for my self care, for my friends, for all these other things that are usually important to us. Like so that you do make an important point there, and because not everybody, like I worked in hospitality for a very long time, I didn't have any Christmases off or much time off at Christmas. But for the people who do, there's an opportunity there to, a few days off in a row to kind of look at. I hate New Year's resolutions; they don't tend to work particularly well. But it is a good opportunity to reflect and go, could I make some small improvement in this area, in this other area? Um, I wouldn't recommend anybody to start anything too drastic in January, right? But if you can start something small, highly recommend the book Atomic Habits if anybody's looking at behavior change and forming healthy habits. And he's talking about 1% improvements per day. Now, I think that'd be a challenge and it'd be difficult to quantify. But if you were aiming for 1% improvement a week or something like that, at the end of the year, you'd be 50% better off than you were at the start of the year. That would be pretty damn good going by anybody's standards. Like, but so let's say anybody kind of setting goals for New Year's resolution type things, set the bar low. Give yourself, no, seriously, give yourself an easy win. Let's set the bar low, hit your target, and then build on from there rather than going, I'm going to run the double marathon when you've never run a 5K. Do you know what I mean? That's how people set themselves up for failure and reinforce negative ideas that they have about themselves by setting the bar too high, not achieving the goal they set out to achieve, failing in their own minds, and then going back to square one. Don't do that. But, set the bar low, hit your target, build from there, and just try to make small gains, small wins on a regular basis, and just keep building. is what I would recommend to people. Um, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think if you're going to do anything for New Year's resolutions, never start on the 1st. I would say either start on the 28th of December or wait till the 5th of January, like the first Monday, to
Sure.
actually do anything when you might have some structure in your life. Maureen, you were going to come in there.
No, I'm just sitting here. My mind is completely blown between what you've been talking about with like the urges and what the brain, the 60,000 to 90,000, like they're things I've never actually heard, but it all makes sense. And just even clear what you're on about, like I can see my own personality. Like everyone always says I have blinkers on. So when I'm doing something, I can't see anything other than what I'm focused on currently then. So I think I went from being a workaholic to right going to work and then coming home and having this gambling. And that was all I was focused on for the guts of 2 to 3 years. Since my recovery, all I think about now is chocolate. I know it's hilarious, but oh my God, it's just like the taste of it. But I absolutely love this whole thing of the devil and like, fuck off, brain, just shut up. I'm actually going to try it. Like, it's just, but yeah, I have actually started to, I wouldn't say the circle, but I think I might actually do that. But I'm trying to split out my time a lot more with other stuff other than work and other than crochet. I actually where if I fall down definitely is myself. Um, I think since my recovery, I've actually let myself go rather than so like my mind is taking over my. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, so I'm putting all my focus onto my recovery in not gambling and working and trying to save money and everything that me myself I've let go. I haven't concentrated on my health more so than my well-being, if that makes sense. Like, and I think that's where I need to start now, pushing a little bit of focus into that area. But I'm actually going to, I think I will sit down and do that wheel and say, right, look, this is the pie of work, this is the pie for family, which would be very small. If they heard me saying that now, they'd kill me. And then this is my crochet, you know what I mean? And split it all up like that. I think it might actually help. But I have stopped with the blinker focusing. Like that much I do know in the last year. And people have said I'm a lot happier for it because I'm not stressing out going, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. It has to be this way, it has to be this way. I've really come now in the last couple of months, whereas, do you know what? If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. A bit more laid back, relax on it, and it's actually helped. And I'm a lot happier for it, like not stressing out over the silly things that I actually can't control. And I think I've
Yeah.
just been on a rant.
No, that's a great rant. And like, yeah, stressing out about things you can't control. Like, I probably spoken about it. We did an episode on this years and years and years ago, looking at the Serenity Prayer. And before, dear listener, you switch off, right? We don't do religious stuff on here. We're a secular organization. I'm not religious. I'm not trying to push religion on anybody, and I'm not anti-religion either. But we operate from a secular space. So, but the Serenity Prayer says, "Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change." So, in other words, don't stress out about things you cannot change, right? Because the amount of time and energy that people waste on banging their heads against the wall of things they cannot change is unreal. And that's everybody. You don't have to be in recovery, you don't have to be addicted to anything. People waste massive amounts of time and energy metaphorically banging their head against the wall of things they cannot change, right? Then the next bit is the courage to change the things you can. Well, if we could shift some of the time and energy that we waste over on the things we cannot change and move a bit of that over to the thing working on the things that we can change, we'd all be better off. And then the last bit is the wisdom to know the difference. So like there's a reason why they say that prayer at 12-step meetings. It's really, really good advice. it's really good advice. If you wanted to boil everything down and you only had one little bit of advice to live by, oh, I can only speak for myself here, but that would be the advice I would live by, right? And that would be what I would, if somebody asked me for one piece of advice that I could give them that what I think would improve their lives, that would be it, right? Nothing to do with addiction, right? Nothing whatsoever. It just happens to be used in 12-step meetings. It's just a better way of approaching life, I would say. So that's a really good point, Maureen, about stressing out about things that you can't do anything about. Yeah, and the blinker thing, like I can get like that where hyper focused on one specific thing. I've dialed back a lot on that in recent years, but certainly at the start of this project, trying to get things off the ground and totally obsessed with every little element of it, and on social media every 10 seconds, making some bullshit commentary about whatever gambling legislation or gambling operators or blah, 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 all that stuff. Whereas now, I try to do my work, clock off, live my life, do some self care time, spend some time with my family, and then clock back on when it's work time again, which I find works better for me and is ultimately better for the people that I work with because I'm not as burnt out as I used to be. Now, we're going to try and stick to a shorter one today. And there was a couple of things on the kind of notes that we were looking at before we started. One of the ones, and this is another one from the 12-step meetings, I think originally, is the HALT acronym, which stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Again, you don't have to be in addiction or in recovery to apply that to your life. If you're a family member listening to this because you want to learn more about your loved ones gambling and understand it better, you can apply this to your life as well, right? Because if you're hungry, angry, sometimes people get hangry when they're hungry and angry, lonely or tired, or a combination of those things, your willpower is going to take a hit, right? On the hungry side, there's a great book just called Willpower, where they did experiments where they gave people this kind of high protein gloop, it's kind of a yogurty thing with high protein in it. And they did these willpower tests on them. And those people did way, way better on these willpower exercises than if they hadn't been given the high protein gloop, or if they compared it with people who'd had kind of a sugary snack beforehand and all these different things. So, like, willpower is strongly linked, and there's lots of good research and evidence to support this, to managing our blood sugars. Right. So straight off the bat, if you're hungry or if you're spiking your blood sugars, Maureen, you mentioned chocolate earlier on. This is not a commentary on your chocolate obsession, because I love sweet stuff as well. But if we're eating, any kind of fast carb stuff, we get that lovely spike of energy. Yay, happy days. Glycemic index goes up, your blood sugar goes up. And then, of course, what goes up must come down. You get the crash, right? And that's not ideal, because when you get the crash, that negatively impacts your willpower. In fact, people with diabetes have a much higher incidence of addictions and impulsive behaviors. Um, and they reckon that that's linked to the difficulties they have with managing blood sugar. So, hungry is important. Sometimes you might be angry just because you're hungry. Lonely is a big one. I think we spoke about that the last time, especially with Christmas coming up. Lonely can be a massive trigger. And tired. Like, I mean, if you're, like, it's some part of me always dreads working with clients who have newborn babies, because you're trying to, important part of any therapy, talk therapy, you're looking at people's self-care and trying to get them in, encourage them to get into a self-care routine. You cannot do that with a newborn baby. That's just an impossibility. Forget about it. You're just a zombie walking around the place. And if you're a zombie walking around the place and then you have to go and do a day's work and you have to mind the baby and you have to do all these other things, you're going to be snapping, right? Your willpower, which we don't just use to recover from addictions, but we also use it to not take the head off our coworkers or our boss or our partner or our children or people in traffic or whatever. Right? We're using that willpower as a filter to stop us from saying and doing other things that are not connected to addiction or recovery at all. And then the idea being that, okay, you could have one of those things going on. Just being tired could be enough for a person to have a relapse. Being hungry and tired, now you're putting yourself in a higher level of risk. Being hungry, angry, and tired, maybe lonely as well. Now the risk levels are going through the roof in terms of relapse. But again, if you're listening to this, you're not in addiction, you're not in recovery. Uh, it There's a higher risk of you having an angry outburst or feeling emotionally overwhelmed in other ways if you have any of these hungry, angry, lonely, tired going on. And the more of them that you have going on, the higher the risk. Am I making sense here, Claire, Maureen?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I just the tiredness one, that really resonates because, and I, even when I'm speaking to other people about it and like trying to help them, it's a vicious circle when it's the tiredness one, because you start off, you know, you have had your urge, you've given into the urge, you're sitting there, you're gambling, then you're up all night, you're tired, your mind, you just cannot think. You can't think clearly at all whatsoever. And then the following day, you're back gambling again because you're overtired. And until you say run out of money, for example, and you actually have that good night's sleep, that's only when the clarity starts to actually lift, the fog starts to lift. So I think the tiredness one is nearly one of the worst ones, especially for the gambling, is because when you're in that lull and the tiredness circle, it's just, you can't get out of it until you literally either run out of money or somebody slaps you or just whatever. But until you kind of jump out of that and you get that good night's sleep, or you start to catch up, you start to feel better, you start to feel focused, you're like, I'm never going to do this again, until something else, either it could be one of the others, the hungry, angry, or loneliness, kicks it off again. But then it's the tea, I think, that really, really, really just, that's the one that I would have felt myself. It's when I was tired or something had happened. But when I hit the tired mode, I just couldn't think straight. I would sit up all night and all night. And yeah, the anger, I think, kicked in a little bit there as well.
Yeah, and it's a fair point, and you know, when you look at them, they look like they don't really connect, but in so many ways they do. What worries me, I suppose, in that lineup is the lonely part, because I think we always think of lonely as alone, and it's not always that at all. What I find and what I'm finding a lot is that I'm working with people who are looking after someone, and they're caring for someone, whether it be a child or you know, someone who needs that extra bit of help. And obviously, when you're caring for someone else, you're kind of not putting in a lot of time for yourself, and that's leading to that desperation for something that is your own, and gambling can fill that hole. So loneliness, you know, you could be surrounded by people and be a very, very lonely person. And I think that's important to remember as well. And we probably all find ourselves in that position at some point. But yeah, that leads to the tiredness, that leads to the frustration, and then you have just your little escape, which is not a healthy one at all, but it's yours, and it's all you have. And we have to remember that, like, we can tell people all the great things that they can do, but at the end of the day, some people are really, really stuck, and they just don't, you know, it is a struggle for them, and they have to deal with it as best they can. I feel like I'm being a bit depressing now. Sorry.
No, no, we're not allowed to be depressing on a Christmas special. No, not at all. Like, and look, in terms of practical stuff, I mean, if you're hungry and if you have access to food, yeah, obviously there's a solution to that. But like, again, don't want to keep harping on about ADHD, but a lot of the people that I work with over the years do have ADHD. And a common thing for people with ADHD is that they'll be hyper focusing on a thing, whatever the thing is, so much so that they'll forget to eat or go to the toilet or do other important things that are useful for the body. So that can be a thing where a lot of stuff sounds really boring. To be scheduling that you're going to eat at regular times, and scheduling that you're going to do your self care, and scheduling that you're going to go to sleep at a certain time and get up at a certain time. But like, there's a great book by a guy called Dr. Matthew Walker. He's been on a few podcasts over the years as well. If you're not into reading about him, or the books on audio as well, if you want to listen to it. But he's a neuroscientist and a sleep expert, and he reckons that sleep is the biggest kind of performance enhancing thing that a person can do, short of taking performance enhancing drugs, right? And they've tested it on like high level athletes. They've tested it in kind of loads of different scenarios. So one of the things that he says, and again, I work with a lot of people who work shifts, so this won't work for everybody, but he says that every hour of sleep that you get before midnight is worth 2 hours after midnight. So straight off the bat, if you were asleep in bed at 11, that's double bubble from 11 to 12, or if you're in bed to 10 again, you're getting double bubble for every hour that you sleep before midnight, right? So this, like, it's so unbelievably important to get good quality and good quantity of sleep on a regular basis. Now, he would say things, and I pretty much do this, which is to go to bed at the same time 365 days a year and get up at the same time 365 days a year. A lot of people wouldn't like to do that, it feels too kind of constricting in their lives, which I get, but there's a big payoff from that. And it's not just, people think about their energy levels, but like there's so many important things that are happening while we're asleep in the body in terms of at a cellular level, that your body is recovering and you're processing information from the day, sometimes in the form of dreams. So these things can be improved upon. Usually there's a little bit of pain and there's a little bit of internal conflict going, well, I like having my lie-ins on a Saturday and a Sunday. I don't want to get up at the same time 7 days a week. But there's a payoff for it. If you have poor sleep, you really need, it's important to get a structure on it. So, I mean, okay, hungry, yeah, they would say foods that are higher in protein rather than sugary foods. Angry, generally that's down to stress management, usually in my experience, the anger management side of things. And that could be through meditation. It could be through getting a decent night's sleep. It could be talking to a friend, talking to a family member, talking to a counselor, phoning up Samaritans, talking to them. They'll talk to you about anything, any time of the day or night. Loneliness, again, the Samaritans will talk to somebody at 4 o'clock in the morning if they're feeling lonely. You do not have to be suicidal to call the Samaritans, or you could go onto the Gamblers in Recovery website. They have details of online GA meetings that are almost 24/7, 365. Jump on a meeting, listen to other people in similar situations, share your own experience if you want to do that. But all of those things on the HALT, the hungry, angry, lonely, tired, can be improved upon and they can be managed better. And that will give you a better opportunity in recovery for sure. Yeah, and they're simple things, but they're important, right? They're really important. Anyway, any final thoughts before we let the nice people go for today?
I want to go back to what Maureen was saying, because I did have this conversation. And look, I've been very honest. Like I can say I do sometimes have to stop myself and go, here, take a little step back there, Claire, and reassess your life because you might be doing great in one place, but you're forgetting about the other. And Maureen has mentioned something similar there. And I was talking to someone about this the other day, and they said to me, yeah, okay, you might have let a few things slip, but maybe that's just what you had to do to get to that point, and now you're ready to do the next part. And
Mm.
I took that, and I was like, yeah, maybe I did have to just work hard to get to a point, and now I can focus on the other thing that is important in my life. It's probably not the best way to do things, but at least I can say, yeah, okay, I recognize that and I accept that, and I'm going to focus on the other things now. So I'm taking that, and it's helped me, I think, and I feel a little bit better that I'm going to focus my energy on other things now. Serenity prayer, though, I have that hanging above my bed. I have it on my keyrings. I absolutely love it. I think that's brilliant advice. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, just yeah, I know you've said it there, but it is a fantastic philosophy for life. So yeah, I think that was great advice, Barry.
Thank you. Yeah, look, with the Serenity Prayer, like if you buy a poster of it, it probably says God at the start. Again, I'm a card carrying agnostic or atheist or whatever you want to call it. So I don't do the God part, but I do use all of the other parts because I find them really, really useful and helpful to me in my day-to-day life. And yeah, I'm yet to find another kind of short piece of wisdom out there that's as useful, not just in terms of addiction, but just in terms of how you live your life. Maureen, anyone for the last few chalk ices, as my teacher said on our last day of secondary school?
No, not really, but I'm definitely, like I said, if I could take anything away from today, I am going to do that wheel. and really kind of just put just put a little bit of focus. And I really liked what Claire just said there, like, maybe we've had to put one thing aside to conquer another. So, now is the time to start looking after myself. So, yeah. But
I'm
no,
with you on that, Maureen.
Yeah.
We're gonna do that one together.
Definitely.
Brilliant. All right. Thanks a million, Maureen, and thanks everyone for listening. And we'll do it all again next week. And if you're listening to this over the Christmas period, happy Christmas to you and yours. Bye.
Christmas.